Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is Dave Opton speaking, and wherever you're joining us from, both Don and I would like to thank you for taking some time from your day to join us for today's program. And we're going to get into that very quickly here. But before we do, just a couple of housekeeping things that I want to go over, particularly for those of you who are new to these calls and aren't totally familiar with the format. Kind of the way this works is this. Even though we are online here, as you can see from the background slide that has both my contact information as well as Don's, neither one of us is here to make a formal presentation. So it's not a webinar in that sense. It's really more like a kind of a conference call where Don and I are simply here as resources for those of you on the call who've got questions or issues that you think either one or both of us could shed some light on. I think between the two of us, we've got a fair amount of experience in the kind of the career management world, and so that's really why we came together today, is to, as I said, to serve as whatever resources we can for you. So the agenda in that sense is set by you as an attendee, and the way you do that is simply by raising whatever questions you would like to raise. And you do that, take a look over to the right-hand side. You'll see the GoToMeeting kind of dashboard there, and there's a area there that works pretty much like instant messaging where you can post your questions. Don't be worried about confidentiality. Nobody sees you or knows your name or anything like that, and we certainly don't use names. It's really the questions that are the focal point. So if you've got things that are on your mind that you would like a different point of view on, just go ahead, fire it up, type the question in there, and we will get to as many of those in the time that we have together as we possibly can. One other item, and that is that obviously whether it's a formal webinar or a program today, which is really kind of like a conference call, as I said, we are very interested in your feedback. We want to make whatever time that you spend with us valuable to you and something from which you feel you have derived value. So when the program is over, you're going to get a chance. You'll get a link to a very brief but important kind of a feedback mechanism, and if you take a moment or two to share your thoughts with us there, certainly we would appreciate that as well. So that's kind of how things work. So as I said, if you've got questions or things on your mind, just go ahead and put it up there, and we'll get to as many as we can. My guest today, and some of you who've been on these calls with us before, I think might recognize the name because Don's been kind enough to join me a number of different times, not to mention the fact that he's done several webinars for us that are available to you as members on a wide variety of topics that you also have access to. But he's taken some time today to join me yet once again. But for those of you who don't happen to know that much about him, let me just take a moment to introduce him to you. He is, as you can see from the slide here, Managing Director and Chief Business Development Officer for us here at ExecuNet. But before joining us, he had founded and spent more than 17 years as the CEO of Rainmaker Associates, which is a performance improvement consulting, coaching, training, and executive search firm headquartered in Exeter, New Hampshire. He is also a recognized expert in the area of personal branding and marketing, networking, and interviewing. Prior to his stint with Rainmaker, he was a 2-time Chief Operating Officer and 3 times Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing. And from an educational point of view, he is a graduate of SUNY Albany, where he holds a BS degree in business and a master's degree in counseling and advanced management certification from Hofstra University down in Hempstead, New York. But he is a very busy camper, as you might guess, but as I said, I'm delighted that he's taken some time again to join me on the call today. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Dave. Happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you, as you know. And while people are putting their questions together or starting to put those up, I thought maybe you could just take a moment or two, because I know you interact with clients on a daily basis, and obviously are deeply involved in kind of what's going on in the career management arena at the executive level. As you look at kind of the first 3 months or so of 2015, are there any particular thoughts that come to mind in terms of what you think the marketplace is doing or where it might be going?
Well, in speaking with members, and then looking at the 17 or so folks that work for me speaking with members as well, what's clear is that the market is continuing to evolve. I think more people are getting noticed and invited for interviews with what I would consider to be very, very mediocre marketing collateral. Resumes that I would strongly advise needing updating are beginning to get people access anyway. And I guess it's the good news for those on the call, but it tells me that there are more jobs, more openings, and that candidates are getting some attention in the marketplace for those jobs. Now, what I then find is that many, if not most, would then tell me that once they get into the interview, they're not advancing. So I think the market continues to be that the number of candidates for every job opening continues to be in the hundreds, if not thousands, that it really is a competition for every job that's out there, that most jobs at the senior level still do not get posted. They're sort of invisible. And that members still need a very strong push and pull strategy. This morning I ran the networking meeting in Boston. It's held in Waltham, Mass. There were over 20 senior level folks in the room, many of whom had never been unemployed before, or if they had, it was a long time ago, or really if they've been unemployed, they've really not had to do a search because people always wanted them, and so there was always a job anytime they were looking. That tends to be the pattern, has been for years. So I think folks often approach the job market in a way very similar to the way they did 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. Resumes often look like they were designed by your college career office. And so the only real change I see is that the economy has picked up, that the number of jobs being interviewed for has risen significantly. I'm still seeing a lot of internal candidates getting the ultimate offer because there's a lot of pent-up demand internally, and folks who are doing the searching, I think, would prefer an internal candidate a lot of the time. So that if you're out there and you're using techniques and collateral that you've been using for a long, long time and not getting the kind of response you think you deserve, then it may very well be time for you to take a look at how you're going to market and whether or not that approach will work in 2015.
Well, makes sense. Thanks, Don. And actually, we got a question here that's sort of corollary to that, and that is this person wanted to know. He said you used the term mediocre resume. Could you talk a little bit more about what you consider a mediocre resume?
I'd rather talk about what I consider a great resume.
Well, you can do both.
Yeah, I probably could. All right. So to me, a mediocre resume is one that doesn't follow the research ExecuNet does. Matter of fact, we're doing our 23rd annual research study as we're on the call here. And some of you may have received an invitation to fill out a questionnaire, which would be then part of the data collection. Mm-hmm. But a mediocre resume is one that isn't compelling, where the writer doesn't have a unique value proposition, where the top third of the page doesn't provide a summary that includes a brand statement, a value proposition, accomplishments with metrics, mm-hmm. and probably 12 to 18 keywords or competencies. Remember, most companies use an applicant tracking system. So the first read of your resume is not going to be done in most companies by a human being. It's going to be done by a piece of software, which means that unless you have the keywords in your resume that the hiring manager put into the job spec that's being posted, you're unlikely to match up. And if you only minimally match up, and they get 382 responses, and you're number 307, it's unlikely anyone will ever get to read your collateral. Mm-hmm. So you need to get into the big pile, but you also need to get to the top of the pile. And that's highly dependent on the first third of the first page of your resume, the executive summary. We're told that folks who, and I won't say read resumes for a living, because that would be an oxymoron. The folks who skim resumes for a living will give you less than 15 seconds of their attention. And unless you capture their attention in less than 15 seconds, there's little, if any, likelihood that you would get a call inviting you in for an interview. The only real purpose of a resume is to get you an interview, to be noticed and invited in for an interview. Everything else beyond that would require, well, and we would recommend that it require a different piece of collateral. And for those of you that have experience either being in sales or being in a sales call of significance for the company you used to work for, remember any marketing collateral that you sent that company in advance of the meeting, they already have. And if you come into that meeting and you're not prepared to present solutions, assuming you asked all the questions up front, and the only thing you had to leave behind was the same piece of collateral that they already had, it just doesn't make much sense. And if you went to a networking meeting like the one I ran earlier today, where there are 20-plus people in the room, and people are handing business cards to one another, how many of those 20 will they actually remember? So we think that collateral to use in a networking event should have a picture on it and what you're looking for in the marketplace, and have color and have graphics. Just like technology has changed in the last, well, you can now get a watch that's really a computer, or at least a cell phone. But a cell phone is really a computer. I mean, all of that has changed dramatically in a very short period of time. Well, there have been changes to resumes too, and if you're not familiar with what they are, as Dave mentioned, I've done a number of webinars on this topic. They're on our site. You're welcome to take a look, and if you still have questions, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me.
Yeah, in fact, while since we got started on this subject, I think I want to take a minute now to show the callers kind of where they can do that before I forget. Kim, if you could just go down to the slide that when you log into the site and you go into the area for to manage your account, you will see a number of different areas here that allow you to do almost anything you want to on the site. One of which has to do with resumes, and there are two things that you should know about this here. One is, as part of your membership, whether you're a basic member with us or a platinum member, part of that includes a complimentary review of your resume. If you've not taken advantage of that, I certainly would urge you to do so, and you can see the link here where you can do it. Secondarily to that, when you do log in, and you'll notice, in fact, if you look at the upper right-hand corner of this slide, you'll see a little magnifying glass, which for most sites, as it does for ours, indicates that you can do a search there. When you click on that, if you type in Don Weintraub, his name, it will take you to parts of the site that have things that Don has contributed, including several of the webinars that I alluded to earlier. And again, as part of your membership, you have access to those. They're recorded, just like today's call is recorded. And you can certainly hear him talk in much more detail about the things he's alluded to kind of already in our call today. And lastly, as long as we're on the site, I certainly, again, and this goes for whether you're a longtime member with us or a new member, if you haven't taken a look at your profile recently, you should. This is the center point of where recruiters will come and where other members come. So it is absolutely in your best interest to make sure that that profile presents you the way you want to be presented. And many folks haven't, sort of looked at that in a while. I certainly would urge you to do that, including down here at the bottom on the left, you see an area called More About Me. Gives you a terrific opportunity to, in your own words, tell others kind of how you feel about these particular topics. And I think you would agree with me that if you took the time to do that, anyone taking a look at your profile would certainly have a better sense of you as a person, not just an executive who spent, 15 or 20 years doing X, Y, or Z, but as a person, which obviously when it comes to hiring is kind of key to this whole process. So if you haven't taken advantage of that, I certainly would urge you to do that as well. Don, thanks for the comments on that. For those of you who might have come into the meeting a little bit late, let me just remind you that this is really your meeting to set the agenda. So if you've got questions where you would like some input from one or both of us on whatever topic is of interest to you, just go ahead and fire them up there, and Don and I are going to get to as many as we can in the time that we have. And I'll start with this one, Don. This person says, I've been through several executive searches consisting of 13 to 17 interviews over a 3 to 5 month timeline. I've received very favorable feedback along the way, and I've been among the final 2 or 3 candidates. Unfortunately, I've not received an offer. Once a decision has been made, there has been little or no feedback or communication following that in order to provide help or insights as to why. Further attempts to contact the hiring manager or HR have also gone unanswered. I would appreciate your thoughts or recommendations when faced with this kind of a situation. Don, I'm sure you've had clients over time who faced the similar hurdle. What thoughts might you have?
Well, there's a good reason why you don't hear anything back. And Dave, as a former HR exec, is in a good position to reflect on what I'm about to say. But you don't hear back because companies are concerned if they gave you real feedback that in the litigious society in which we live, that feedback could be used as the basis of a lawsuit. So the legal departments in companies strongly recommend that during the interview process, you give as little tangible feedback as possible, especially to the candidates who aren't being hired. That's why you don't hear back. I'd love to give you advice for what you could do to hear back, but it's probably not going to be very usable advice because, who am I to counter legal counsel and suggest it should be done in a different way. So that's why you don't hear back. Now, I'd be frustrated just like you are, especially if I'm coming in second or third, and especially if it's happening more than once. The only thing that I could suggest here is to maybe work with a third party to get some feedback on how you're presenting yourself, get some feedback in terms of your value proposition, how you're promoting that, the kinds of questions you're asking during the interview process, how prepared you are around the company's hiring process and who's making the hiring decisions. There's a whole body of knowledge around how to prepare for an interview and then how to conduct it in order to get the offer. And if you're consistently advancing but not getting the offer, there's probably something that you're doing that you're not aware of that's leading to that conclusion. If it happened once, if it happened twice, but when it's happening the number of times it's happening, my guess is it's something you're either doing or not doing. And that, I think, could, in theory, be corrected if some knowledgeable person was coaching you and listening to you and hearing how you present yourself during these interviews, and then, in a sense, being paid to give you honest and open feedback, something you're probably not going to get from the company itself.
Yeah, I would totally agree, and on all the counts that Don has mentioned. I will say that on a personal level, over the years, when I have been going through this myself, I was fortunate enough a couple of times, and I think this was because the relationship, not with the company in this case, but rather the recruiter that happened to be working with at the time, was able to give me some feedback because I guess he felt comfortable enough in the relationship that he could do that, and maybe was a little less fearful of lawsuits than certainly a company would be. But it's tough to get. But as Don says, that's certainly why that's happening. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is.
But Dave, the recruiter, I would mention that the company I ran for 17 years, as Dave mentioned, had a recruiting division.
Right.
So I'm very familiar with recruiters. And, recruiters are like any other industry. There are very good ones, there are mediocre ones, and there are horrendous ones. Yeah. The really good ones know the company they're sending you to extremely well. Yeah. They can prepare you for the individuals you're going to be speaking with. They have relationships with those people. They'll get feedback from those people. Whether they choose to share it or not is a whole other question. But there's a whole body of recruiters who really don't know and don't have the trust of the company they're working for, so they don't get the feedback either. Yep. And they'd probably be too embarrassed to tell you, my relationship isn't one where I get, meaningful feedback to share. So I would really, if you're in a position to choose, you might have some questions for recruiters in terms of how locked in they are to the company they're representing, how long they've worked with the company and or the people you're going to be dealing with. And it's their job to guide you through this process. And if not, they're not doing a good job of that and they can't answer your questions. Don't expect them to have really good feedback at the back end if they don't have good input at the front end.
Fair enough. Don, this question it's sort of corollary to this because it has some legal implications to it. The question is this: says in a recent in-person ExecuNet networking meeting and ExecuNet webinar, a discussion was brought up about including photographs on resumes or not including them from a legal standpoint, for example, age, male, female, ethnicity, etc. In those meetings, it was suggested to leave off the photographs. What do either one of you think about this, photo included or not?
Never. The answer is never. Can I be any clearer? The answer is never. The only time that it makes any sense is if you happen to live in Europe. It's cultural. In other countries, they put pictures on resumes. In the U.S., you put a picture on a resume, and you're going to be viewed as completely out of touch. So the answer is never. Now, on your LinkedIn profile, you're 8 times, or ExecuNet profile, you're 8 times more likely to get a response from the person looking at your profile if there is a picture. So just like I said, without hesitation, never put a picture on a resume, I would then say always put a picture on a profile. May not make sense to you, but that's one of the few rules where it's black and white.
Yep, I would certainly agree with that, and I know it sounds kind of crazy, but we have to remember that the EEO laws under which we operate in this country went into effect long before there was an internet and long before social media and so forth. So the fact that on the official stuff where they have to keep resumes on file and so forth, you play the game differently than you do online, and I think most of us would understand that. You still may get some differences of opinion, but at least as far as Don is concerned, or myself, there's no difference of opinion here. Okay. Again, if you came in late and you've got questions, things you'd like us to talk about, go ahead and post them, and we'll be more than happy to try to respond. This question, Don, says this. It says, what path, having any probability at all, can senior executives in their late 60s utilize to gain full-time employment? It really speaks to age discrimination, which seems to begin around 40. Well, the average age in our network is 53, so I can assure you that this is not a subject that is unfamiliar to us. And Don, I know in working with your clients, it certainly isn't anything that's foreign to you either. What sort of thoughts would you have for someone in this situation?
So, a couple of thoughts. First and foremost, and please, whoever submitted this question, don't take this wrong, but I believe much of what is considered discrimination is going on within the head of the prospect who's not getting a response. Oh, it must be because I'm old. Now, if they don't see a picture, if you've done your resume correctly, you haven't included things going back to when you were 6 years old, in 1941, then age will not necessarily come across on your document. Don't use words like seasoned, unless, of course, you rub garlic into your skin each morning. Don't show an AOL account for your online account. The only people who still have AOL accounts, by definition, are old. So there are things you can do superficially that will sort of hide your age and at least not make it a factor on the resume itself. I'm working and coaching, as a matter of fact, he was at my meeting in Boston this morning, a gentleman who's 72 years old. He actually is still employed, and he's looking to make a move. And, you know, he's very, very talented. He's a consultant. He's looking to move to a different kind of consulting role, but he's 72. But he doesn't behave like when my grandmother was 72. You know, 60 today is probably the new 48. And so, yes, there are plenty of jobs out there for folks in their 60s. Now, how would I package you? Because I think this is more a packaging issue. I would go to small companies rather than large ones.
Yep.
Why? Because in small companies, you bring a wealth of experience. The age, the flip side of age is experience. If you go to a company that doesn't have lots of specialists, quote unquote, and where the fact that you've done 6 different things over your career will be seen as an asset, not a liability, that's something that I would strongly recommend. I know in the Boston area, annually the Boston Globe puts out a supplement, the best companies to work for, you know, in Massachusetts. I know, traveling as much as I have over the years, you'll find similar kind of supplements in newspapers across the country. Fortune magazine always lists the best companies to work for. Local business journals will often do the same. If I were starting a search at the age I currently am, those would be the first companies I would look to. Why? Because they've already established a reputation for being the best companies to work for. So why wouldn't I go to them first? Likelihood of them discriminating would probably be somewhat negated. So we strongly believe that anytime you're going to do a search, you need a strategy and you need a plan. And part of that should be who you're going to target. And whether it's age discrimination, gender discrimination, having been unemployed for 3 years, whatever the case might be, you need a plan that will enable you to succeed despite whatever this drawback might be. And I truly say this in the kindest way I can imagine. Don't get hung up on these things, because you'll become your own worst enemy. If you feel that no one's going to hire you at the age you are, it's probably going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So don't create a craziness in your own head that then becomes real. Pretend as if, behave as if you're still employable. There's somebody who wants you. It may be a slightly different role. It might require you to, you know, start at a level or 2 below where you'd like, but don't give up. Take it from me. I know what age I was when Dave hired me. Oh, that's the other secret. Always go to work for a company where there already are people of that age group in senior level roles. It's harder for them to discriminate than if you went to work in a startup where the oldest person in the company was 28. So think about this, come up with a plan and a strategy, and work the plan, and my guess is things will improve.
Thank you, young man.
Thank you, old man.
I was going to say, I'm almost 76, and my wife says I act like a 10-year-old, so I guess I'm doing okay.
You see, that's the secret, Dave, is to stay immature for as long as you possibly can.
I'm working very hard at it. In all seriousness, and I certainly wouldn't add a lot to what Don has had to say because I think he's spot on. But the fact of the matter is, obviously there's age discrimination. It's been around forever, and it's only one item on a very long list of discriminatory factors that all of us are certainly well aware of. That said, I certainly don't. It doesn't mean that it has to be a showstopper. Realistically, is it probably going to take longer? I think there's very little question about that. But it certainly isn't impossible. And yeah, it at least legally kicks in around 40, which is where the federal law starts, which is why it starts there. But in our research over the years, it doesn't seem to become really a sort of a real issue or a significant factor until after the age of 50. At least in those places where it's going to be a factor. I would also, for those of you who might be in the, kind of the over 50 group and are just either experiencing age discrimination or wondering, okay, look, I can't change my age, but are there some other tactics or strategies or things that I might do to kind of, make it a little more even playing field? The answer is yes. And I would refer you back to when we showed the slides earlier in the program, where that little search magnifying glass was. If you go in there and type in Jean Walker, Jean Walker, there's a woman named Jean Erickson Walker. Jean runs our networking meetings out in the Portland, Oregon area, has for many years, and kind of her passion, if you will, is working with what she calls folks at midlife. She's done a webinar here on this whole subject, which I think for those of you who are interested, I would commend it to your attention. I think you'd find some things in there that would in fact be very useful. Here's a caller who's commented on what we were just talking about. It says the company needs ROI, so smaller companies can get a better return than a large machine that has to process numbers. Yeah, I think that's very true. As Don said, the flip side of age is experience, and what a more experienced person brings, particularly to a smaller organization, is a breadth of knowledge that they would find difficult to acquire, or might have to find two people to fill, that information gap. And I think they just tend to look upon that as an advantage more so than larger corporations, where there's a tendency to be very, very constrictive in terms of the pigeonholes in which people are put. So, and one other thing I would just quickly add to that, and that is that one sector of the kind of the market that values that kind of experience greatly is private equity, because the companies that they run, they are certainly, the last thing in the world they want to do is have somebody parachute in who they think is a candidate for on-the-job training. They want people in those roles with track records that that show that they really know what the heck they're doing and can do that in very short order. So if that's a sector that you haven't thought about exploring, it's one that you might want to take into account. Okay, let's see here. This person says, I am a white male, 57 years old, with a degree in computer science. Career has been Fortune 500 companies where I held several different roles, including project manager, solution architect, principals, and consultant. My last salary had a base of $108,000 with a bonus of 15%. I have been unemployed as a result of a reduction in force for nearly 2 years, but I've done contract work, volunteer work, while I continue to try to find full-time employment. Other information, my resume is up to date. I've had it reviewed by a, quote, professional in the HR field. My LinkedIn profile is often viewed. I have more than 700 LinkedIn contacts. But I can't relocate due to care that has to be given to elderly parents, but I can travel. My question is this. From what I've shared with you guys, can you tell me, or do you have any thoughts or reasons as to why I may not be receiving an offer. I guess my quick answer to that is, even with the information that you've given us here today, quite frankly, you know, there's not enough there for me to really make what I think is an educated guess here. I think, like 1,000 other job seekers who get a call or email on things like this, there's so many factors that can go into it, and I just quite honestly don't think there's enough information here. If you're not, to me, there's sort of two general levels here to look at carefully. One is, are you getting screening interviews? If the answer to that question is no, then clearly I would, as Don has alluded to earlier in the call, I would be looking at the materials that I'm using to try to get those screening interviews, specifically my resume or other collateral that you're using. And the second tier, of course, is if you are getting interviews, as the earlier caller was, but not getting offers, then that obviously suggests that there's something in your interviewing skill toolkit that might need some burnishing, so that you can compete better with others at that stage. And there are a gazillion other factors that could be involved as well, in terms of the industry that you're coming from. Is it contracting or expanding? You know, what are your networking efforts really turning out to be, or are you investing way too much time and energy responding to online job postings where the probability, where the competition is greater, number one, and secondly, where the probability of getting a call back is even less. So if you want to contact me offline, I'll be happy to talk to you a little bit more about it, but from what you've said here, those are the only things I would sort of throw out in general. Don, is there anything you would want to add to that?
I'd add two things, Dave. The questioner said I had an HR person review it.
Yeah.
Well, so what? You know, if it's just because an HR person reviewed your resume, doesn't mean that that particular individual is up to date on what a resume should look like. I hear this all the time. Oh, I had you know, my third cousin, you know, review my resume, or, you know, an HR, or I have a friend who's a recruiter, and she took a look at my resume. Well, you know, that it just doesn't guarantee anything, because most people are stuck in a very old paradigm when it comes to resumes and other marketing collateral. And if you have the wrong person look at it, you know, you're going to get bad advice, and my guess is, without looking at it, that it's part of your problem. That's number one. But even more so, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of members I've talked to between the networking meetings I do and the resume reviews I've done and all the rest. And that's since I've been with ExecuNet the last 5 years, and for 100 years before that. I see the biggest single issue. I saw it in spades this morning at my session. Most people cannot define their unique value. Most people don't know what is in their past that's going to stand out when they're competing for a job. Remember, it's a competition. It's a competition when you send in your resume and somebody is reviewing them. It's a competition once you get the interview and you're going up against other candidates. There's only going to be one winner. You're competing. So what are you counting on to win? If you can't give me 3 or 4 bullets right off the top of your head, 3 or 4 bullets that are compelling. Most people give me generic information. They can't think of anything about themselves that's truly unique. And so one of the services that we provide to help people, because it usually requires, or often requires, a third party, is help fleshing out unique value. And I can only think of 1 or 2 instances in all of my experience doing this where somebody really didn't have anything unique. But most people do. They just have never really thought about it in the correct way or at all. And so if you can't differentiate yourself in writing and then in person, you're probably not going to get the attention you think you deserve.
Don, I have just a quick follow-up question to that may or may not be on the minds of our callers today, and that's this. If that's true, if most of us are not able to do that, why do you think that is? Is it because maybe we don't look for a job that often in our lives, or is it because we've grown up in a culture where you're not supposed to pat yourself on the back? Why do we have so much trouble doing that?
I think it's a combination of a number of things, Dave. A number of folks, especially folks who, half the group I had this morning weren't born in the U.S. It was a fascinating group. I had people literally. I had somebody from Ireland, a couple of Canadians. I had somebody from Israel, someone from Italy. When you grow up outside the U.S., the culture is such, and even in certain parts of the U.S., in the South, in the Midwest in particular, you find, or I find, that folks have been raised not to brag. And so they've never really thought about it that way, or even if they thought about it, they've never had permission to kind of share it with others.
Okay.
So I think that that's one factor. Number two, most folks during an interview think about sort of verbally sharing what's on the resume. And pardon this for sounding like a sexist comment, but it is. Most men, I think, have far more trouble than women sort of articulating, talking about themselves as a person rather than where they've worked and what they've done at work. And this I see now more women doing this in terms of real career focus. Who I am is often where I've worked and what I've done. The value proposition often has nothing to do with that, or little to do with that. It's who you are. And most folks really haven't thought about, prepared for that conversation. Who am I? And what is unique about me? I'm working with that 72-year-old guy I was talking to you about, and what I discovered is that he grew up in a family where his dad was a custodian, foreign born, came over from Central Europe, got a job at a church as the custodian for a school and a rectory and the church itself. My client is one of 6 boys, and he grew up literally all 6, helped their dad after school doing this kind of work. You see, I hear that and I think about someone who, number one, didn't grow up with a silver spoon, but understands what hard work really is. He was the only one of 6 to go to college. That to me is compelling. He also has invented over 240 inventions and has 2 patents. Now, I start listening to that, I want to start asking him questions. And the key to an effective resume and or a brand statement and or an interview is, are you going to say something that's going to generate questions? Because questions then generate conversations. And the best interviews for you to be in are ones where it just becomes a conversation between 2 people. But you really need to give some thought and or get some help in developing the value proposition. It's, to me, the missing link for most of the people I talk to.
Fair enough. Thanks, Don. This caller wants to know, we were talking about the age thing and the PE, the private equity sector. Wanted to know what the best approach is to getting in touch with private equity firms. Let me give you a quick answer to that, and Don may have some other thoughts as well. But again, I would refer listeners back to the search little magnifying glass that I showed you earlier in the program. And this time I would suggest that you type in Mike Lorelli, L-O-R-E-L-L-I. Mike is a former CEO, has worked with a number of private equity firms, and is now actually part of one as well. But he does a couple of different webinars for us on the whole section, the whole sector of private equity. And if that's something that you're interested in, I would again refer you to both one or both of the webinars that he did. He does a terrific job of explaining how that world works and ways and means to get into it. The second piece of advice I would have in that regard is certainly follow the business press in terms of, and research, I guess, is the name of the game in terms of what companies are being held by private equity firms and so forth, and that is not all that difficult to find out either. Don, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, there's one thing that I would add, and that is whether it's a private equity firm or a McDonald's, if you simply go in cold, if you simply find the names of these private equity firms and then send them a letter saying, hi, I'm looking for a job in private equity, can we talk? The likelihood of your getting any kind of response is almost zero. It's like cold calling in a sales situation. You want to avoid that at all costs. So my advice in getting into any company, private equity especially, is you need to get an introduction. You need somebody who knows you and who knows someone in that company so that they're willing to make a referral on your behalf. If you believe even for a second that you can get in cold, you're probably going to be disappointed. So that would be my recommendation to get into a PE firm, and it would probably be the same recommendation for just about any meaningful role.
Thanks, Don. This caller says that they work for as a process safety engineer for a Fortune 500 company, and that their salary is capped at $85,000, and they are wanting to reach the 100K level. It says it has 10 years work experience and in engineering and an engineering and training certification. The question is, do either one of you have any thoughts about how I should approach entering the six-figure realm? Don?
Huh. I'm almost at a loss here for words because, again, it seems like a self-imposed obstacle. There's a reason why you probably haven't gotten there already. That would be the first thing I'd want to know. What kind of ceiling has gotten in the way of your getting there now? Why do you think that changing employers is necessarily going to get you that kind of raise? Would you think it was going to happen on the way in the door, or would you have to prove something in order to get to that level? There are certain companies that would take the job you're currently in and would equate that to a position worth $120,000.
Exactly.
So there's really no one way to answer the question without knowing more about why you're not already there. Where do you live? 80,000 living in certain places might be worth 120 living in LA or New York or Boston.
Yep.
So I really can't give a better answer than that, David.
Yeah. No, I think you've touched on a couple of really key points, and the only thing I would add to it is and again, we've got a lot of content that focuses around negotiations and so forth, and the factors certainly that Don has mentioned can certainly play a role. Geography, the fact that you're working for a Fortune 500 company, suggests to me that larger companies tend to have job grades and job and salary ranges. And his questioner says he's capped at 85,000, which may be a function of simply the salary range for the company in which he works, where he is, and has nothing to do with, as Don has already alluded to, the value that some other company would place on the exact same role, whether it's in different geography or a smaller, you don't know. So I wouldn't, in that sense, be concerned about it. It's a question of marketing yourself and believing
you're worth six figures.
Yeah. So again, you could use our search engine to type in compensation or salary negotiations, things like that, and you will find that we've got a lot of content with a lot of great ideas in terms of when you get into the conversation, how you can convey, as what Don has already alluded to, the fact that you're worth what you believe that you're worth.
And most companies are going to ask in advance, Dave, what are you currently earning?
That's right.
And depending on how you answer that question, you either have a shot at earning more, or you're going to still be capped, even though it's a new employer. Mm-hmm. So negotiating that offer is an art. There's a skill to it. And again, that's one of those areas where if you're not good at doing it, you may want to get third-party help in negotiating that deal.
Yep. This caller says there are PE internet recruitment firms that are scams. Understanding the need to be introduced to get any interest.
Absolutely.
How do you avoid these outfits?
You run the other direction as fast as you can. Yeah. Anyone who promises you, oh, they're going to put you in touch with 3,000 recruiters, 200 PE firms. All they have is a mailing list. And as you've said, and as Dave and I well know, these are scams that take advantage of people when they're at a very vulnerable position. So I would run as fast and as far away from anyone promising you a job or an interview or whatever. No one can promise that. They really can't. You have to earn it. They can perhaps provide some opportunities and some training, but anyone that asks for large sums of money in advance should be avoided at all costs.
I can't say it any better than that. I can tell you over the years the number of members that I've talked to who have been burned by outfits like that. And,
absolutely.
I guess the other way I would say it is, if it sounds too good to be true, end of story.
Yeah.
And we know who most of these outfits are because we've been around for a long time. But so anybody who's concerned about that, if you're dealing with a particular organization and want to contact me, if I know anything about them, I'll be happy to share it with you. Let's see here. Can you comment on how will job seekers assess how big is the pool of positions I'm targeting, and how much competition is there for these roles? Don, I'm sure, has some thoughts on this. My quick comment would be certainly responding to ads online. I don't know if it talks to how many such jobs there are, but it sure as hell talks to what the competition is going to be like, because once it's out there, which is another reason why 70% of the members that we talk to here who make a change tell us that the critical factor for them was networking. There's a trap that a lot of people fall into in this technological age where they invest way too much time answering ads because it's so easy, and they think they're having a productive day by doing that, but you certainly are broadening the competitive pool by doing it. The only other way I would know to sort of at least get a sense of it is to do some research online in terms of the segment the industry segment that you're talking about, and in particular, if you've got company names, even better, and understanding a little bit about kind of what their situation is, as a company and in the segment that they operate. Don?
LinkedIn at least used to, on their job postings, put the number of people who have applied for that particular posting. So that would certainly give you, assuming they still do that,
Yep.
that would certainly give you a sense of how many folks. But more importantly, if you're earning $150,000 a year, our research would say that only about at that 12 to 15% of all jobs at 150 and above are ever posted anywhere. So if you're depending 100% on 15% of the opportunities, you can imagine how much competition you're going to have for that 15% that get posted,
Yeah.
rather than the 85% that never get posted,
Right.
and that are invisible. So that's where you need to have recruiters working on your behalf. That's where you need your ExecuNet profile and your LinkedIn profile to be, as part of your pull strategy, to be attracting people to you, rather than you sending emails out every day to jobs that you find online. You need to have a balance in your approach. And if you're not actively looking, but also easily found, you need to make yourself easily found. And to do that, you need to know how the search engines work. And in order to do that, you need to get some training from folks who understand it well enough to be able to give you a dozen tips on how to maximize your chances of being found.
Great. Thanks, Don. We've reached the top of the hour, but and so here's kind of a nice way to wrap things up for today, because we got a comment here from one of the callers who, when we were talking about the resumes and marketing yourself and so forth, and she says the compelling career differentiators are very helpful, and the ExecuNet branding and copywriting team is excellent at this. So we thank you for the comment. We appreciate it.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Don, anything you want to say to the group before we have to close out?
No, I think just that the market has improved, therefore your chances have improved. It's frustrating. It creates self-doubt. I get all that. I've been there. I've done that. I understand sort of the psychological aspects of being in job search and being over 50. Just don't allow yourself to become your own worst enemy. Think positively. There are jobs out there for you. You just have to learn how to market and sell yourself better. So that's what I would leave folks with.
Yeah, well said. Okay. Well, thanks to our callers for joining us today. Certainly hope you'll join us for other programs down the road. Kim, who's been operating this call in the background, as always, my thanks to you, and Don especially to you for taking the time to join me today. And with that, we'll wish everybody a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.